Thank you. Let's begin with the first question and answer session. We'll try to answer as many questions as possible. Therefore, we ask that only one question be asked per phone call and that these questions be as brief as possible. You may call the studio directly at the phone or fax numbers which appear on your screen, including the ITC iPhone number 688-1700. We'll remind you to make your phone calls at a distance from the monitor to avoid feedback. Our first question is coming from La Paz, Mexico. Go ahead, please.
Hello, this is Margarita Gracia from La Paz, Baja California, in the south, in the government offices. And our first question has to do with this new organizational culture that we have, that we are visualizing for the future. How can we, public entity offices, stimulate this change of workforce culture? What can we do to change it?
Well, with a government organization, that makes it even more difficult, perhaps, than even the private sector can be, principally because there are what some of the major levers of change you don't have control of. You don't have control of your funding, really. You are at the beck and call sometimes of political decisions of which you have no influence. And that the necessity of changing organizational structure, how people are paid, for example, where people will have to work, where they provide their services, there's a limit in terms of how much you actually have an influence on that. And so, in part, you may be limited just to attempting to be motivating people by giving them symbolic acts about how things might change. One particular example would be what happened to the New York City Police Department in the late 1980s. The crime rate in New York was quite high. Morale at the police force was quite low. But what actually happened is that the chief of police went in and made some very symbolic kind of changes, and in addition to that, provided feedback and information to the precinct commanders at the same time, and encouraging them to improve on the kind of statistics that what he was gathering. And a combination of those symbolic acts and the feedback and action planning that occurred from that information being given provided a rather remarkable effect, not only in terms of the productivity of the New York Police Department, but also in terms of the morale of the police officers. It's quite skyrocketed as a result of that.
Thank you. Our first fax question comes from Lima, Peru, and I will read the question. In your view, how should universities cope with the speed of change we are all facing in our communities?
Again, universities suffer from some of the same limitations as any public organization does. In large part, though, that many of the changes that universities are suffering from have to do with demographics, how many young people are actually coming into the university. And so one really has to probably change in terms of what markets one is going after, because it very well may be that it's best for a university to focus on adult education rather than on education of those people in the early 1920s, because that perhaps is where the majority of their population might be.
And in terms of cultural change, that young people are coming through the universities, whereas you have the adult workforce, and how those two cultures work together.
That can be a very different kind of circumstance for sure. In one particular part, you have people who have limited work experience. In essence, they may be going directly from high school to college and perhaps to graduate school. And as a result, they don't have the day-to-day experience of working in corporations that adults do. They're less likely to have families, less likely to have homes, mortgages to pay, those kind of issues. And so, to some extent, the working adult population, I should say, is actually a very different kind of aspect and can't be treated just as slightly older people going through the same system.
Great. And Panama sends us this question via the fax. How can we reduce stress in the workplace given the intense competition we all face in education, business, and even government?
Sometimes the best way to reduce stress is to change the situation. If you don't have time to change the situation, or if you don't have control of the situation, then perhaps the only choice you really have is to put yourself in a different situation. If the university is not a place where one is really happy at, then frankly, leave and find a place where you are happy.
And in terms of your own personal well-being, I guess if you cannot leave the workplace necessarily, then you probably have the choice of working on yourself and reducing stress internally. All right, very good. Thank you for your questions. Let's now move to the second module of our program.